Please sit. Along with every other agony and infamy which is hurled down upon his wounded head today, there is this. Before he dies, he must climb a hill. Before he tumbles into the grave, he must scale a mountain. Dragging a beam of wood, he staggers up the slope of Mount Calvary, straining to reach his Father in heaven, stretching to reach his Father's right hand in glory. And then he gets to the top of the mountain, and his Father isn't there. My God, he cries, why have you forsaken me? Along with every other irony that is hurled down upon his wounded head today, there is this. He who spent every day of his life with his eyes fastened on his Father, going only where his Father led him, doing only what his Father showed him. Now that he's finally done it, his Father is nowhere to be found. Because he's no longer following his Father in heaven. Like a prodigal son, he's wandered away from his Father. Because he's going now in search of those who have wandered away from his Father. And he who once commanded us to follow him, now in his humility, he's reduced to following us who have gone astray. He's going now to meet us where we live. And if there remains any doubt today about where it is we've been living, then we need only watch to see where he is going, because he's going now to save us. And though they drive him with whips and goad him with curses, all the soldiers in Palestine could not hope to stop him now from seeing this to its end. For his mind is made up, and his heart is set upon it. But his mind was made up before the foundation of the world. And his heart was set upon the peak of that God-forsaken hill before the world was wrecked. They drive him now with whips. But long before it occurred to anyone to reach for a whip, the Son of God was driven by something fiercer than a scourge. He was driven by love. This is love. That a man should lay down his life for his friends. And this is the Father's love of the world, which saturates the Son. Long before it occurred to anybody to reach for a whip, the Son of God parted himself from his Father's glory and took the form of a servant and took the part of sinners, and he took our side. That's the meaning of every meal he ever shared with the tax collectors in Jerusalem. And that's the meaning of the bread he shares with us today. That's what he embraced when he embraced that beam of wood. Us in all our sin. But he bent himself beneath that beam long before he reached Jerusalem. Driven by love, dragging a beam of wood, he climbed the mountain until he reached its peak, until he reached the broken crown of the place of the skull, until at last he reached the depth to which we've fallen. And there at last, he lost all sight of God. They threw him down and nailed him to the beam, and then they raised the beam high above the hill, and they flew his bloody body like a flag above the world, as if men had finally conquered the last mountain on earth. Behold the man, stretched like a canvas. His flesh is torn open, and his eyes are swollen shut, and his neck is bent beneath the weight of our thoughts and our words and our deeds. The weight of the iniquity of us all is laid upon him. Whether or not this is what justice demands, this is what love demands. This is love. That God should lay down his life for his enemies. And these are the pains of love which God suffers in the flesh of his own heart. This is the weight of the world parted from God. This is the weight of the world laid upon the man, which parts him from his Father. This is the weight of that beam of wood which bruised his shoulder. This is the intolerable weight of our sin. It weighs. It weighs enough to wreck the world. It weighs enough to wound the Son. It weighs enough to tear him from his Father's right hand. Our thoughts, our words, and our deeds, if there remains any doubt today about what they have done to us, then we need only look to see what they have done to him. They crush him like millstones. Behold the man on the mountaintop, transfigured. Only now his appearance is so marred beyond human semblance. And this time, the voice from heaven, well, this time there is no voice from heaven. Like a sheep before its shearers, his Father in heaven falls dumb, beholding the man, despised and rejected by men, as one from whom men hide their faces. His Father hides his face. His Father closes his eyes, and the Spirit departs from him, and the man hangs his wounded head and dies. It was the method then to hasten or to ensure a criminal's death on the cross by breaking his legs. But these soldiers, who neither knew nor cared for Hebrew prophecies, fulfilled one prophecy more. They fulfilled the prophecy that though his flesh was flayed and his body impaled, not a bone of his should be broken. So, for reasons of their own, they chose instead to pierce his side. So they took up a spear, and they imposed the fifth most precious wound upon the body of our Lord. They took up a spear and they forced it through his skin, and they probed with its point through the tissues of his breast until they found his heart. Until his heart was set on the point of a spearhead. But since before the foundation of the world, his heart was set on this, and having searched it out and found it, they threw all their weight against it, and they pierced the heart of God. And that being done, the work of the people was complete. They jerked free the bloody spear and dropped it clattering to the earth. And when the spear had come to rest, it was as though the whole world had come to rest, and all the dust he had ever raised had finally settled, and all the heavens and all their hosts fell silent in total stupor. But in the awful silence of that awful hour, when it seemed that the last words the world would ever hear would be the sobbing of women and the buzzing of flies, there was one sound more to be heard. It sounded at first like a babbling brook. It sounded, of all things, like the gurgling of a smashed fountain. But when they turned and looked, they saw that it was only him whom they had pierced. And what they heard was the splattering of blood and water spilling from the heart of Jesus to soak the peak of the last mountain on earth and to baptize the broken skull of the world. And as they hid their faces in horror, the Father's eyes were opened to see the world saved.